The night I found out my father had erased my name from 11 years of my life, I was sitting at my kitchen table eating soup I'd made from scratch because it was a Tuesday and that's what I do on Tuesdays. My cat, a gray tabby named Ledger, was asleep on the radiator. Rain hit the window in slow, uneven intervals. My phone buzzed. It was my brother Marcus. Not a call. A text. Just 2 sentences. Dad signing everything over to me next month. Thought you should know. I set the spoon down. The soup went cold. I didn't call my father. I didn't call Marcus back. I didn't scream or cry, though I want to be honest with you and say that the crying came later, in the shower, where I let the water run until it turned cold and the feeling still wasn't out of my body. I just sat there in my kitchen in the quiet and let those 2 sentences say what they said. Then I went to the filing cabinet in the closet behind my winter coats. The one with the lock that nobody in my family had ever seen. The second drawer. I pulled out a folder. Cream-colored. Rubber band stretched thin from years of sitting undisturbed. Inside, 11 years of originals. My name. My signature in blue ink. My 40% stake in a company I had spent more than a decade building with my hands. I poured the soup down the drain. I didn't need soup anymore. If you've ever had the ground removed quietly from under you by someone whose job it was to hold it steady, you already know exactly what I'm describing. Hit like and subscribe, and drop your location in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know where in the world you're watching from. But I need to take you back to the beginning, because what happened at that dinner table 2 months later won't mean anything unless you understand what came before it. What was built? What was stolen? And why a cream-colored folder in a locked drawer was the only thing standing between me and losing everything. My father's name is Gerald Calloway. 72 years old. A man who believed in handshakes, ledgers, and the idea that a family business is the most honest inheritance a person can leave behind. He built Calloway Properties from a single rental unit on Decatur Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut, into a portfolio of 4 commercial properties appraised collectively at $2.3 million in the last independent valuation. He did it over 30 years. Slowly. Carefully. The way men of his generation built things, with patience and stubbornness and a deep, abiding conviction that the right kind of person could be trusted and the wrong kind never could. For 11 years, I was the right kind of person. My name is Nadia Calloway. I am 38 years old. I have a master's degree in business administration from the University of Hartford and 11 years of operational management experience in commercial real estate. I know how to read a lease agreement. I know how to negotiate a property maintenance contract, manage tenant relationships, resolve municipal code violations, interpret a profit and loss statement, and close a year-end audit without losing a dollar or a night of sleep. I learned most of it from my father. And then I applied all of it to his company for a decade, while the aged and my brother Marcus, who is 35 and works as a financial consultant in Chicago and visits Bridgeport approximately 4 times a year, received the credit. That last sentence is not bitterness. It is just the math. My brother and I were never close in the way siblings who share a dinner table are supposed to be. Marcus was 7 when I was 10. And even then the distance between us was not the distance of years but something else entirely. Something that had to do with how differently our father looked at each of us. Gerald Calloway looked at Marcus the way a man looks at a monument he's already decided to build. He looked at me the way he looked at his tools. With respect, yes. With reliance, absolutely. But tools are not monuments. Tools do the work that monuments get credit for. I noticed it early. The way my father introduced Marcus at community events when we were children. This is my son. 3 words. The pride in them was physical, something you could feel from across the room. When he introduced me, it was simply, and this is Nadia. As though I were a footnote in a sentence he had already written. I told myself for years that it didn't mean anything real. That men of my father's generation understood sons differently. Prioritized differently. I told myself this the way you tell yourself a cut isn't deep enough to need stitches. You keep your hand pressed against it and you walk forward and you wait for it to stop bleeding on its own. My mother Charlotte was what I would describe, as charitably as I am able, as a woman who loved peace more than she loved truth. She wasn't cruel. She saw what was happening, I believe, the way you see weather coming across a flat horizon. You recognize it. You don't run toward it. You close the windows and hope it passes before the real damage starts. She never intervened. She never corrected my father when he described Marcus as the heir apparent at family dinners while I sat 3 feet away having managed that heir apparent's inheritance for better than a decade. She never said, "Gerald, it was Nadia who fixed the Decatur Street roof situation. Gerald, it was Nadia who renegotiated the Harborview lease and saved us $14,000 in a single year. Gerald, Nadia is the one who showed up." She just passed the bread and redirected the conversation and let the silence do what silence does when no one stops it. I joined Calloway Properties officially in the spring 11 years ago. Not because my father asked me to. Because he called me on a Tuesday evening in March with the quiet desperation of a man who has run out of answers and cannot bring himself to say so out loud. The property manager had quit without notice. The Decatur Street building had 2 open code violations. 3 commercial tenants were threatening to break their leases over deferred maintenance. He called and said, I could use some help sorting a few things out. I understood the translation. I gave notice at the architecture firm where I had been working, negotiated a 20% equity stake in the Calloway Properties LLC, signed the operating agreement at the office of an attorney named Vincent Pruitt in New Haven, and I went to work. My father sat beside me at the signing. Marcus was in Chicago. He knew nothing about it. The 20% became 40 within 18 months. My father offered it without my asking. He sat across from me at his kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon and pushed a revised operating agreement across the wood and said, "You've earned more than I gave you." I signed it. He signed it. Vincent Pruitt notarized it. I took a certified copy home in a manila envelope. I filed it in the back of a filing cabinet I had purchased specifically for documents that mattered to me. And then, because something in me that has always been careful and has never entirely trusted the world to stay the way it presents itself, I made an additional copy. I took that copy to a safety deposit box at a bank on the far side of town. A bank my father had never used. An account that existed only in my name. I did it the same week I signed the agreement. I could not have told you then exactly why I did it with such deliberateness. But I did it. And I filed it. And I left it there, undisturbed, for years, the way you leave something in reserve that you hope you'll never need. 11 years. 11 years of lease negotiations and vendor contracts and tenant mediation and city inspections and annual audits. 11 years of my father calling me first when something broke and calling Marcus first when something was worth celebrating. 11 years of watching Marcus fly in from Chicago for the holiday dinner where my father would describe the business's growth as though Marcus had authored it from his consulting desk in Illinois. "You know your brother has such a head for the long game," Gerald would say, and Marcus would smile in a way that did not correct anything, because comfortable people rarely volunteer discomfort on behalf of someone else. I want to tell you about a specific moment. Thanksgiving, 3 years into my time at Calloway Properties. Gerald had invited the Harmon family. Old friends, long-standing. Mr. Harmon had mentored my father decades earlier, and he still carried the easy authority of a man accustomed to having his opinions taken seriously. He leaned toward my father during dessert and asked about the portfolio. "Heard you turned around the Harborview property. What happened there?" My father smiled. "My son Marcus has a real vision for what this company can be. He sees the long game." Mr. Harmon nodded, impressed. Marcus, seated 2 chairs down, said nothing. He took a bite of pie. I watched him do it. I watched him choose the easy thing. I set my fork down and breathed through it and said nothing at all. I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time before going upstairs. Not because I was crying. Because I was deciding. I was deciding whether I would say something the next time it happened. I decided no. Not yet. I went inside and opened a notebook I kept locked in my desk drawer, and I wrote down what had happened. The date. The room. The words. I had been keeping that notebook for 2 years by then. My mother used to say that a woman who keeps receipts expects to be owed something. She didn't mean it as a compliment. I took it as one. The first indication that something had shifted came 18 months before Marcus's text. I was reviewing the insurance renewal documents for Harborview. Standard procedure. Annual review. I was comparing the new certificate to the prior years to confirm coverage hadn't been altered without my knowledge. The named insured's field on the new certificate listed Gerald Calloway and Marcus Calloway. Not Gerald Calloway and Nadia Calloway. My name was gone. I had signed the original insurance application. I had initialed the named insured section myself. I set the document down. I looked at it for a long time. Then I called the insurance broker. He was apologetic and vague and said there had been an update request from the account holder approximately 8 months prior. I thanked him and ended the call. 8 months prior I had been in the middle of the Decatur Street lease renegotiation. I had not looked at the insurance certificate. I had not been asked to look at it. My father had called the broker and changed a document with my name on it and replaced my name with my brother's, and he had done it quietly, without discussion, without my signature, without any explanation I had ever been offered. I did not confront him that day. I called Sandra Holt, the attorney who had taken over Vincent Pruitt's practice, and I asked her to run a full records audit on Calloway Properties filings with the state and county. I paid for it out of my personal account. She sent her findings 3 weeks later. Not just the insurance certificate. The property deed for Decatur Street had been amended and refiled. The LLC operating agreement on file with the Connecticut Secretary of State had been updated. Addendums, quietly submitted, my 40% stake reclassified as a consulting arrangement, Marcus's name added as a co-principal. The signature on each amended document was Gerald Calloway's. The filing dates ranged across the previous 2 years. 2 years of slow, methodical erasure. Not dramatic. Not sudden. The way you don't notice a tide going out until you look down and realize the sand under your feet has been bare for a long time. I sat in Sandra Holt's office while she walked me through each document, and I said very little. She paused at one point and asked if I needed a moment. No, I told her. Keep going. When she finished, she set her folder down and looked at me directly. What do you want to do? I told her to do nothing yet. She looked at me the way people look at someone who has just refused the life raft being handed to them. I told her I had the originals. Every one of them. The original operating agreement. The original property deed before amendment. The 40% stake in my name, certified, notarized, and dated, filed in a drawer that did not exist as far as my father knew. Sandra looked at me with a different expression then. With the very specific kind of professional respect that comes when someone walks into your office carrying more than you expected. The amendments your father filed are real, she said carefully. But they cannot unilaterally supersede a prior executed agreement without your consent or a court order. I know, I said. When you're ready, she said, let me know how you want this to proceed. I thanked her and left. I drove home. I went to the closet. I checked the folder behind the winter coats. Still there. Cream-colored. Rubber band still intact. My name exactly where I had placed it years before, in an office in New Haven, on an ordinary afternoon, with no idea yet what I was protecting it from. I went back to work the next morning. And the morning after. I did not tell my father what I knew. I did not tell Marcus. I did not tell my mother. I managed the properties and returned the calls and reviewed the contracts and answered every email with the same competence I had brought to every day of the previous decade. And I waited. Not because I was afraid. Because a man who has done what my father had done doesn't keep it quiet indefinitely. Eventually, pride and the need to make a thing official overtakes caution. Eventually, he calls a meeting to announce it. He sent the text on a Friday afternoon in August. Not to me. To Marcus. Marcus forwarded it to me 40 minutes later, preceded by those 2 sentences I told you about at the start. Dad's signing everything over to me next month. Thought you should know. I stared at my phone for a long time. Then I called Sandra Holt. I told her it was time. She said she would be ready. I told her I needed one more thing from her. I told her what I needed and she was quiet for a moment and then said she could have it prepared within the week. Good, I said. I hung up. I went to the closet. I took the folder out and set it on my kitchen table and I sat across from it the way you sit across from someone you've been waiting for. The rubber band was still intact. The documents were still exactly as I had left them. My name was still there, in blue ink, on every page that mattered. Gerald Calloway had spent 2 years replacing me with my brother on paper. He had done it carefully and deliberately and without a word to my face. He had called a meeting to make it permanent. He did not know about the folder. He did not know about the safe deposit box. He did not know about Sandra Holt. And he did not know that I had been waiting, quietly and completely, for exactly this. He set the date for a Saturday dinner in October. Family only, he said. Something important to discuss. My mother called to confirm I was coming. Of course, I told her. I'll be there. The week before the dinner, I drove to Sandra Holt's office on a Wednesday morning and sat across from her desk while she walked me through what she had prepared. A bound document set. Tabbed and organized. The original LLC operating agreement, certified copy, bearing my signature and my father's and Vincent Pruitt's notary seal, dated 11 years prior. The amended operating agreement my father had filed with the state, bearing only his signature and the name Marcus Calloway where mine had been. The original property deed for Decatur Street with my name as a 40% title holder. The amended deed filed 18 months ago with my name removed entirely. The original Harborview lease, signed by me as authorized agent of Calloway Properties. The insurance certificates, before and after. 7 documents in total. 7 pairs. Before and after. My name, then my absence. Sandra had placed them in chronological order so that anyone reading through the stack would understand, without a single word of explanation, exactly what had been done and exactly when. She looked at me over her reading glasses when she slid the folder across the desk. You understand that what your father filed is potentially actionable as fraudulent misrepresentation of LLC ownership. I understand that, I said. Do you want to pursue legal action? Not yet, I said. I want him to understand what he did before anyone else makes that decision for him. She accepted that. She had learned by then not to push me toward a pace I had not chosen. There is one more thing, I told her. And I explained what I needed her to do on Saturday evening. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she could arrange it. Good, I said. I picked up my copy of the bound document set, put it in my bag, and drove back to Bridgeport. I want to tell you what the days before that dinner looked like from the outside, because from the outside they looked like nothing at all. I went to work every morning. I reviewed the quarterly maintenance schedule for all 4 properties. I followed up on a permit renewal for the Seaview Avenue building. I returned phone calls and wrote emails and did every single thing my father's portfolio required of me, the same as I had done for 11 years, while knowing that in fewer than 7 days my father planned to sit me down at his dining room table and inform me that none of it had ever technically been mine. I slept well every night. People find that surprising when I tell them. But I had been waiting for more than a year. The waiting was over. All that was left was the moment, and the moment I had prepared for so carefully that anxiety had nothing left to attach itself to. Marcus arrived in Bridgeport on Friday. He texted me from the airport, landed, seeing Dad tonight, dinner Saturday. I replied, see you there. He sent back a thumbs up. Marcus had never been unkind to me, I want to be precise about that. He had never plotted or conspired. He had simply been the son my father wanted to give things to, and he had accepted what was offered without ever asking whether the offering was honest or whether someone else had paid for it. There is a particular kind of harm that comes from people who are not cruel, just comfortable. Marcus had always been very comfortable. If you've been holding your breath through this story the way I held mine for 11 months, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now so you never miss an upload. Your support is what makes it possible for me to keep bringing you stories like this one. My father's house sits on a corner lot in the East Side neighborhood where he has lived for 30 years. White colonial. 2 stories. The same black shutters he repainted himself 3 summers ago because he does not believe in paying someone to do a thing you are physically capable of doing yourself. I arrived at 6:45 on Saturday evening. The porch light was already on. Through the front window I could see the dining room lit up and moving shapes. More people than I had expected. I sat in my car for a moment. My bag was on the passenger seat. Inside it, the bound document set Sandra had prepared. I did not open the bag to check it again. I had checked it twice that morning and once in the parking lot. It was there. Everything was there. I got out of the car, walked up the front steps, and let myself in. The dining room table had been extended with both leaves, something my father only did for Thanksgiving or significant occasions. 7 place settings. White cloth. The good dishes. Gerald stood at the head of the table in his navy blazer, the one he reserved for what he called serious business. He was talking to Leonard Webb, the company accountant, who had prepared Calloway Properties books for the past 9 years and who was now, apparently, a dinner guest. Marcus was beside the window with a glass of wine, his wife Claire seated across from him. My mother moved between the kitchen and the dining room with the particular focused anxiety of a woman who has been told this dinner is important without being told why. And seated at the far end of the table, a man I did not recognize at first until he turned and I placed him, was Arthur Harmon. The same Mr. Harmon who had sat at this table years ago and heard my father describe the Harborview turnaround as Marcus's vision. Gerald had invited his mentor to witness this. The man whose opinion he had valued for 40 years was here to see the transfer of Calloway Properties to Marcus made real and official in front of the family. I understood then that my father was not simply signing over the company. He was staging a ceremony. He had set the table and lit the room and invited witnesses because he wanted the world arranged around him at the moment he declared his legacy complete. He was a man who built things slowly and needed someone to watch when he was done. I set my bag on the chair beside my place setting and I said hello to my mother and I shook hands with Leonard and nodded at Arthur Harmon and sat down. My father hugged me briefly and said you look well, and I said thank you and I meant nothing at all by it. Marcus poured me a glass of water. Claire asked about the drive over. I answered every question. I was the most composed person in that room and I had been composing myself toward that specific moment for 11 months. Dinner was roast chicken. My father always made roast chicken for important occasions, as though the meal itself had to be solid and unambiguous, without the distraction of anything complicated on the plate. My mother had made the potatoes. Leonard talked about his grandchildren. Arthur Harmon told a story about a property deal from the 1980s that my father had heard before and laughed at in exactly the right places. Marcus was warm and easy the way he always was in a room where he was already winning. Claire complimented the table setting. I ate. I listened. I said the right things at the right moments. I refilled my water glass twice. I did not touch the wine. When the plates were cleared, my father stood. He did it the way men of his generation stand when they are about to say something they consider permanent. With both hands flat on the table for a moment first, and then a slow rise, and a pause at full height to let the room come to him. Everyone looked at him. That was always the thing about Gerald Calloway. He knew how to make a room look. He talked for several minutes about what the company had meant to him. The years of building it. What he had wanted it to be. He said the word legacy twice and the word family 4 times. He looked at Marcus when he said family, and Marcus nodded in the way he had always nodded, receiving whatever was directed at him with the ease of a man who has never had to reach for anything. My mother's hands were folded on the table. Leonard had his professional neutral expression in place. Arthur Harmon listened with the solemn attentiveness of a man being asked to bear witness to something he considered meaningful. I sat very still. My bag was on the chair beside me. Then my father said it. "I have made arrangements," he said, "to transfer full ownership and operational authority of Calloway Properties to Marcus, effective the 1st of next month. Marcus has agreed to take on the responsibilities of principal, and I am confident the company will be in the right hands." He looked at me then. "Nadia," he said, "will continue in her consulting capacity through the transition. We're grateful for everything she's contributed over the years. I'd like to raise a glass to Marcus and to the future of this company." Leonard reached for his wine. Arthur Harmon reached for his wine. Claire touched Marcus's arm. My mother looked at her folded hands. And Marcus, to his credit or perhaps to his discomfort, looked at me before he looked at anything else. And in his face there was something I had not expected. Not triumph. Not ease. Something that looked, for just a moment, like a man realizing he might not have all the information he thought he had. I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then I reached into my bag. I set the bound document folder on the table in front of me. Sandra had used a clean black cover, crisp and professional. I opened it to the first tabbed section and I laid it flat. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I did not perform anything. I simply placed a document where everyone could see it, and I spoke in the same even tone I had used to return phone calls and manage lease negotiations and run this company for 11 years. "I'd like to show everyone something," I said. The table went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the temperature changes. "This is the original Calloway Properties LLC operating agreement," I said. "Signed 11 years ago by Gerald Calloway and notarized by Vincent Pruitt. It establishes my ownership stake in this company at 20%. I turned to the next tab. "This is the revised agreement signed 18 months later, same parties, same notary, increasing my stake to 40%. This is the deed for the Decatur Street property, original filing, listing Nadia Calloway as a 40% title holder." I turned the pages slowly. Deliberately. Not rushing. I had waited 11 months. I could take another 3 minutes. "This is the amended deed my father filed 14 months ago, removing my name. This is the original LLC agreement on file with the Connecticut Secretary of State before my father submitted revised documents. And this is what he filed in its place." I set the last document down and I looked at my father. He had not moved. He was still standing at the head of the table with both hands flat on the cloth, and his face had done something I had never seen it do in my entire life. It had gone uncertain. Not angry. Not defiant. Uncertain. The way a man looks when the architecture of something he built without a proper foundation begins to shift under its own weight. "I kept the originals," I said. "Every single one." 9 words. I had not planned them exactly. They arrived the way true things arrive, without decoration. Leonard Webb set his wine glass down with a sound that was very small in a room that had become very large with silence. Arthur Harmon looked from the folder to my father to me and back to my father. Claire's hand had left Marcus's arm. Marcus was looking at the document in front of me with the expression of a man reading something in a language he thought he knew and discovering he had been wrong about several of the words. My mother had not lifted her head. My father found his voice. "Those documents have been superseded," he said. "The filings with the state represent the current structure of the company." His tone was the one he used when he was certain he was right and needed the room to understand this. The certain tone. The closing the conversation tone. The one I had heard my entire life. I turned to Leonard Webb. "Leonard," I said, "as the company accountant, Can you confirm that a unilateral amendment to an LLC operating agreement, filed without the consent or signature of an existing equity partner, constitutes a valid change in ownership structure? Leonard was a careful man. He was also an honest one. He looked at my father before he answered. Then he looked at me. He cleared his throat. No, he said. It would not. You would require the consent of all existing partners to alter their stake. I looked at my father. He had not signed the amended documents. He had not asked me to sign them. He had not told me they existed. I had not consented to anything. Gerald, I said, I never signed those amendments. There is not a single document in any pile your attorney prepared that carries my signature agreeing to change what we agreed to 11 years ago, and again 9.5 years ago. The originals are still valid. The amendments you filed are not. The silence after that was not empty. It was the fullest silence I have ever sat inside. Arthur Harmon set his wine glass down. He looked at Gerald Calloway with an expression I could not entirely read but that contained, unmistakably, the weight of a man reassessing something he had believed. Marcus put both hands on the table and looked at them. Claire looked at her plate. Leonard opened his mouth, closed it, and reached into his jacket pocket for a pen he did not end up using. My father sat down. He did not choose to. His legs made the decision for him. He sat down into his chair at the head of the table and he looked at the documents I had laid out in front of me and I watched him understand, for the first time, that he had made a mistake he could not talk his way past. Not in this room. Not with these witnesses. Not with 11 years of originals organized into tabs on a black folder sitting 3 feet from his hands. Marcus spoke first. He surprised me. He said, Dad. Just Dad. Nothing after it. Just the one word, and in it everything. The question. The realization. The thing he had never let himself ask because asking would have required him to stop being comfortable. My father looked at him. He looked at Arthur Harmon. He looked at Leonard Webb. He looked last at me, and I held his gaze without flinching because I had been practicing for this moment every day for 11 months. And I was not afraid of his eyes or his silence or the version of himself he was trying to hold together in a room where it was no longer possible. I don't need an answer tonight, I said. Sandra Holt has been in contact with your attorney. She'll be reaching out Monday morning. What happens next is between them. I am simply here so that everyone in this room understands what the truth is before anyone signs anything else. I closed the folder. I put it back in my bag. I stood, picked up my glass of water, and finished it. I said goodnight to my mother, goodnight to Leonard, goodnight to Arthur Harmon. I looked at Marcus and said I'll call you this week. I did not say goodnight to my father. I picked up my bag and I walked to the front door and I let myself out into the October night the same way I had let myself in, quietly, without ceremony, as though I had simply come for dinner and was now going home. I sat in my car on the street outside my father's house for 4 minutes. Not because I needed to compose myself. Because I needed to give myself permission to feel what I was actually feeling, which was not triumph and was not peace and was not the clean satisfaction I had imagined for 11 months. It was something more complicated than any of those things. It was grief and relief braided together so tightly I could not separate them. Grief because the man who had taught me to read a balance sheet and negotiate a lease had spent 2 years trying to make me disappear from the thing we had built together. Relief because I had kept the folder. Because the folder was real. Because the truth had been sitting in a drawer behind my winter coats for years, waiting patiently for the exact right room. I started the car and drove home. Sandra Holt called Monday morning at 8:52. My father's attorney had received her correspondence. He had reviewed the original documents. He had advised my father that the amendments, filed without Nadia Calloway's signature or documented consent, did not constitute a valid restructuring of the LLC and that proceeding on the basis of those documents would expose Gerald Calloway to significant legal liability. My father had listened. He had not argued. Sandra told me this in the measured tone she used for facts she wanted me to receive clearly. What do you want to do, Nadia? I told her what I wanted. She said she would make the call. Leonard Webb called me that afternoon. He said he wanted me to know, personally, that he had been unaware of the document changes. That if he had known the amendments were filed without my consent, he would have flagged it. I told him I believed him. I do believe him. Leonard is an honest man. He was simply not a man anyone had asked the right questions. Arthur Harmon called the next morning. His voice was careful and direct, the voice of a man who has sat across from difficult conversations for 40 years and knows the only way through is straight. He said he had spoken with Gerald. He said he was sorry for what I had been put through. He said he hoped the company would find its footing. I thanked him and we ended the call. My mother did not call that week. She called the following Sunday, and she said very little, but she called. And the calling itself was something. Marcus came to my apartment on Wednesday evening. He knocked twice, evenly, and when I opened the door he was standing in the hallway with his hands in his jacket pockets looking like a man who has been rehearsing a conversation and has decided to abandon the rehearsal. "Can I come in?" he said. I stepped back. He came in. He sat at my kitchen table where I had been eating soup 9 days earlier when his text arrived, and he looked around my apartment for a moment the way people look at a place they have never been and are trying to understand quickly. Ledger came out from under the couch and regarded him with the professional suspicion of a cat who has seen everything. I made coffee. I set a mug in front of Marcus and sat down across from him. He wrapped both hands around it. He did not drink it. He looked at me and said, "How long did you know?" "About a year," I said. He nodded. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I needed it to be said in the right room." He accepted that. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't know he'd done it." I looked at him steadily. "I know," I said. "And that's its own problem, Marcus." He looked at me. "You were going to accept the whole company without ever asking how it got there." He did not deny it. He just nodded again, slowly, the nod of someone taking a blow they have decided they deserve. We sat at my kitchen table for an hour and a half, Marcus and I, while the coffee went cold and Ledger eventually decided Marcus was acceptable and settled on the chair beside him. We did not solve anything that night. We did not reconcile 11 years of invisible labor against 11 years of effortless inheritance in 90 minutes over coffee that neither of us drank. But we talked. We talked the way siblings talk when all the comfortable distance between them has been removed and what is left is just the truth of two people who grew up in the same house and understood it very differently. He asked me what I wanted from the legal process. I told him I wanted what the original documents said I had. Not $1 more, not a gesture, not an apology dressed up as a settlement. I wanted my 40% restored to the record, officially and permanently, and I wanted every amended document my father had filed corrected and refiled. He said he would not contest it. He said it clearly and without hesitation, which was the first thing Marcus had ever done quickly where I was concerned, and I noted it. "I am not going to take something that isn't mine," he said. I looked at him. "You almost did," I said. He looked back at me. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." Marcus flew back to Chicago on Thursday. Before he left, he called my father. He told him he would not be accepting the transfer. He told him the originals were valid and that fighting them would cost more in legal fees and reputation than the company was worth. He told him Nadia had kept everything and that there was no version of this where Gerald Calloway wins in a courtroom or anywhere else. I know this because Marcus told me afterward in a text, detailed and uncharacteristically careful, like he was writing a report he wanted to get exactly right. He said our father had listened without interrupting, which meant Gerald already knew what was coming before Marcus said a word. A man does not go quiet like that unless he has been sitting with a thing for days and has already arrived at the end of it without anyone's help. Sandra Holt and my father's attorney spent 3 weeks working through the paperwork. I did not attend any of those meetings. Sandra represented my interests and I trusted her completely, the way you trust someone who walked into your office expecting a standard consultation and walked out understanding that you were carrying something much larger than you had shown at the door. The terms were not complicated because I did not make them complicated. My 40% stake fully restored to the public record. Every amended deed and operating agreement refiled with the corrections documented. A formal letter from Gerald Calloway's attorney acknowledging that the prior amendments had been filed in error, that language careful and legally sufficient and utterly inadequate as a human description of what had actually happened. I did not ask for damages. I did not ask for the full company. I did not ask my father to stand in front of anyone and confess to what he had done. I had already done the thing that mattered. I had done it in front of Leonard Webb and Arthur Harmon and Marcus and Claire and my mother and the roast chicken and the good dishes, and the room had understood. Sandra called me when the last document was signed and filed. "It's done," she said. "Your name is back where it belongs." I thanked her and put the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment looking out the window at the November street below, gray and leafless and very ordinary. My name was back where it belonged. It had never left the folder. But now it was back in the world, in the record, in the place my father had tried to remove it from. I put on my coat and walked to the bank across town. The one with the safety deposit box. I signed in, went to the vault, opened the box, and I took out the original documents one more time. I looked at them. My name on every page that mattered. My signature in blue ink beside my father's. I put them back. I closed the box. I signed out and walked home. I did not need them anymore. But I needed to see them one last time in the place I had chosen for them, in the drawer I had chosen, in the bank he had never thought to look in. I needed to see how far I had carried them before I let them rest. The thing nobody tells you about being vindicated is how quiet it is. People imagine vindication as a loud thing. As the moment the room turns and the faces change and someone finally says what you always knew they should have said. And that moment does happen. I had it at a dinner table in October with my father's mentor watching and his accountant going still and my brother realizing for the first time what comfortable had cost. That moment was real and I will not pretend it wasn't exactly what I had prepared for. But after the moment there is just your life. The same kitchen. The same cat on the radiator. The same Tuesday soup. And underneath all of it, the understanding that has been waiting since the night the text arrived and the folder was still in the drawer and the soup went cold. That understanding is not loud. It's just true. My father called me in the third week of November. Not through his attorney. Not through my mother as intermediary. He called me directly from the landline at the house on the corner lot, the one with the black shutters he repainted himself because he does not believe in paying for something you can do with your own hands. I let it ring twice before I answered. He said my name. Nadia. He said it the way you say a word you have been avoiding and have finally stopped being able to avoid. I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I convinced myself it was the right thing. For the company, for the family. I convinced myself Marcus was the steadier choice. I said nothing. He kept going. I told myself you were strong enough to handle a different arrangement. That you didn't need the paper to know what you were worth to the company. His voice was measured and slow, the voice of a man reading from something he has written and rewritten for days. I understood that, actually. I understood the impulse to draft a thing before you say it, to find the language that carries the truth without carrying the full weight of what you did. I have kept notebooks for years for exactly that reason. I waited until he was done. Then I said, strong enough to handle it is what people say when they have decided that the person they're talking about doesn't deserve better. He was quiet. I kept going. I am strong enough, Dad. I have always been strong enough. But that is not the reason you did what you did. You did it because you decided Marcus mattered more. And you did it on paper because paper feels permanent. You just forgot that I also had paper. He did not respond to that for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Smaller. The voice of a man who has been carrying the weight of a thing and has finally set it down in front of someone and is seeing it from the outside for the first time. I was wrong, he said. Not, I made a mistake. Not, I convinced myself. Just I was wrong. 2 words. They are not enough for 11 years and 2 years of systematic erasure and a Saturday dinner where he dressed up in active theft in his best navy blazer and called it a legacy. They are not enough. But they were real. I could hear that they were real. Some silences you can fake and some you cannot, and the silence after those 2 words was not a performance. I told him I would continue managing the properties through the end of the year while we determined the best path forward for the company. I told him I would not be making any decisions about my long-term role under the pressure of the past month, and that he should not expect one until I was ready to give it. He said he understood. He said he would be grateful for whatever I decided. I said goodnight and ended the call and sat for a while with the phone in my hand thinking about gratitude. About how it sounds different when it arrives after a loss than when it is offered from a position of power. About how my father had always been generous with his praise for Marcus and how little that generosity had cost him, and how 2 words of honesty on a November phone call cost him more than anything he had ever given away. Arthur Harmon sent a letter to my office the first week of December. Handwritten, 2 pages, cream stationery with his name embossed at the top. He wrote about my father, about the company, about what he had witnessed at the dinner table and what it had clarified for him about the nature of a legacy. He wrote that a business is not built by the person who receives it but by the person who runs it, and that he had known, if he was honest, for some years which Calloway had been running Calloway Properties. He said he had told Gerald as much. He said he hoped I would stay with the company and that he meant that as a professional assessment, not a consolation. I folded the letter and put it in the filing cabinet. Not behind the winter coats. In the front drawer, with the other things I want to be able to find easily. Leonard Webb took me to lunch in January. A proper lunch, the kind he reserved for clients he considered worth his full attention. He said the books confirmed what the documents had told the dinner table. 11 years of operational decisions that increased the portfolio value by 62%. His number, not mine. He had run it himself after the dinner because he wanted to know. He slid a single sheet across the table with the figures on it. He did not say anything. He just let me read it. 62% over 11 years. The Harborview renegotiation alone had generated a net gain of $240,000 across the life of the revised lease. Leonard drank his water. I drank mine. We did not need to say anything about the numbers because the numbers said everything, the way numbers always do when you let them be honest. I made my decision about the company in February. I told Sandra first, then my father, then Marcus by phone from my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon while Ledger sat on the counter being specifically instructed not to sit on the counter. I would remain as operational manager of Calloway Properties, retaining my 40% equity stake, with a formal management agreement that documented my role, my compensation, and my authority over day-to-day decisions in terms that left nothing implicit and nothing at the discretion of anyone else's interpretation. My father would retain his 60% as principal owner. Marcus would have no operational role, though he was welcome to the relationship with the company that blood and family provided, which is to say the dinners and the phone calls and the knowledge of how things were going. Not the decisions. Not the credit. Not the title. My father agreed to everything without negotiation. I believe he understood that negotiation was no longer something he had earned the right to. I will tell you what I did not do, because it matters as much as what I did. I did not pursue the fraudulent misrepresentation claim Sandra had told me was actionable. I did not call reporters or post documents online or ensure that the story of what Gerald Calloway had tried to do became the thing people associated with his name in the Bridgeport real estate community where he had built his reputation over 30 years. I had the tools for all of it. I chose not to use them. Not because I forgave everything in a clean, uncomplicated way that made a tidy ending. I did not forgive everything and I do not pretend otherwise. But I had seen my father on that phone call in November, and I knew that a man of 72 who has spent his whole life believing he understood the right kind of person, and who has to sit down at his own kitchen table and understand that he got it wrong about his own daughter, is already living inside a consequence I did not need to make larger. I kept the 40%. I kept the company. I kept my name on the record. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I walked through all 4 properties on a Tuesday in March. Just walked. Checked on the Decatur Street tenants, spoke with the building super at Harborview, reviewed the exterior condition of Seaview Avenue, stopped at the Broad Street building and stood in the lobby for a few minutes looking at the light coming through the front windows the way it does in early spring, flat and new and without any of the weight of winter. This is what 40% looks like, I thought. Not a number on a document. This. The lobby. The tenants' names I know without checking the list. The maintenance schedule I carry in my head. The 11 years of decisions, large and small, that made a $2.3 million portfolio out of a single rental unit on a corner lot where my father once believed the right kind of person had to be a certain kind of name. I have a different filing cabinet now. Same closet, same wall, but I replaced the old one with something sturdier. The folder is still in there. Cream-colored. Rubber band replaced because the original one finally gave out last fall after years of doing its job. I do not open it often. I do not need to. But I know it is there. I knew it was there on the Tuesday the text arrived and the soup went cold and my father thought he had finished something he had actually only begun. I knew it was there on the Saturday in October when I set it on the dinner table and let the room understand. And I know it is there now, in the back of the second drawer, behind documents that bear my name in the present tense and not just the past. There is a thing I understand now that I could not have put into words 11 months ago when this began. Patience is not the same as passivity. Silence is not the same as acceptance. And keeping a record is not the same as waiting for revenge. I kept that folder because I was careful, and because some quiet part of me knew that what had been built honestly deserved to be protected honestly, and because I have always believed that the truth does not expire just because someone files something over it. It waits. It sits in a drawer in a bank across town and it waits for the room and the moment and the person who kept it to be ready. I was ready. The folder was ready. The room was October and the table was set and my father stood at the head of it in his navy blazer and said legacy and did not know that the legacy was already mine. I am Nadia Calloway. I am 38 years old. I run a commercial real estate portfolio in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that is worth 62% more than it was when I walked through the door 11 years ago. My name is on the deed, the operating agreement, the insurance certificate, and every lease I have ever signed. It is on the record at the Connecticut Secretary of State and the County Assessor's Office and the law firm of Sandra Holt, attorney at law, who keeps her own copy of everything because she learned from watching me that a woman who keeps receipts is not a woman who expects to be owed. She is a woman who already knows what she is owed and is simply waiting for the right moment to show the room. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.